It's not that we're going to wreck the economy. We're going to wreck their economy, the economy that only works for the billionaire class. It doesn't work for the working class.
United Auto Workers President Shawn Fain was on CNN with Jake Tapper, where he made such a fantastic point that even Tapper had no way to really push back. So I'm going to get to a couple of clips from this interview that also gets into Joe Biden briefly. And I'm also going to show you a clip from CNBC where a former Ford CEO was on discussing his thoughts on these ongoing contract negotiations between the UAW and the big automakers. Give you a little hint where that's going to go into crazy territory because this person is not connected at all to reality. But before I get to that, let me first play for you the first clip here. So this is going to be about Joe Biden. I did not really expect Joe Biden to come up in this conversation, but he was one of the first questions that was asked of Shawn Fain here. And I really liked the response from Fain.
When you spoke with the lead a week ago, you made some headlines by declining to say when or if you will endorse President Biden for re-election, saying that the union's endorsement has to be earned. I assume, is that still how things stand?
Yeah, I mean, it's we have a lot of work ahead of us, a lot to be done, and as we say, our endorsements are going to be earned, not freely given, and actions are going to dictate endorsements. So we'll see how things continue to play out, and we have a lot of issues to resolve. I mean, there's a lot with the EV transition that has to happen, and there's hundreds of billions of our taxpayer dollars that are helping fund this, and workers cannot continue to be left behind in that equation.
President Biden considers himself to be the most pro-labor president ever. Do you see him that way?
I think there's a lot of work to be done in that category. I mean, I look back at FDR and presidents such as that time frame, and that did a lot of work for labor. But I don't want to turn this into a debate about President Biden. That's really not what we're here about. I'm here to talk about our members and where we've got to get. So.
All right, so I'm going to get to the comments about Biden being the most pro-labor president ever in a second. But first, on this endorsement or lack thereof from the UAW, this is how it should be done. When you have labor power, organized labor, why should they just give up their endorsement 14 months early? Now, I do expect them eventually to endorse Biden because the Republican is going to make things much worse for labor. But you might as well hold out now. There's no political reason to do it. There's no pressure on you, really. It makes sense to try and, get some more concessions, get some more promises out of Joe Biden before you give that endorsement. To me, this is much different than, AOC or Bernie Sanders endorsing Joe Biden right now. It's just, you have politicians who are Democrats, essentially. I mean, Bernie's independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats. AOC's a Democrat. Are they really not going to endorse Biden before the election next year? Of course they are. No, why are we playing these games? Of course they're going to endorse him. I don't think you're going to really get concessions from Biden for holding out your endorsement. Now, it's different if you're actually in a primary against Biden, but if you're not in a primary, what are you really going to ask for? There's no. It doesn't make any sense to me for people to get freaked out over these early endorsements from Biden or from Bernie and AOC and other more left-leaning Democrats because they're obviously going to endorse them. When it comes to labor, they have more power. They have more sway. I think it makes sense. There's no political pressure. It makes sense to hold out. But on this idea that Biden calls himself the most pro-labor president ever, I think Shawn Fain has a good response here. FDR is much more pro-labor. But with that said, you could point to some good things that are happening at the NLRB, which aren't necessarily Joe Biden's doing, but people that have been hired to take care of this stuff have been doing a pretty good job at the NLRB, with this recent ruling being the greatest example of that. I talked a bit about this in my breakdown of the debate between Crystal, Kyle, and Bree on voting Democrat versus Green, but I'll bring it up here as well. So this is from the actual NLRB website, their headline here. Board issues decision announcing new framework for union representation proceedings. So the quick summary from Reuters. The board says that the majority support for unions is enough to force bargaining, and this ruling applies when employers commit labor law violations. Meaning, in the past, if there were labor law violations, or if there were labor law violations committed by the employers in the past during a union election, then they would redo the election. Now, instead of redoing the election, they're just going to say, the NLRB is going to say, well, you committed labor law violations. We're just now going to recognize this that these people want to unionize, and you have to actually negotiate with them, this is a massive step forward for labor. So I think it's important to point things like this out while also recognizing that, or acknowledging that Biden is not the most pro-labor president of all time. maybe in my lifetime, but I have not been around since FDR, despite how old I may look to some people. So let me get to the next clip here, where this gets into more about the contract and these big automaker CEOs.
Analysts say a prolonged strike will push up auto prices and dramatically hurt the economy. Are you worried about either of those possibilities?
It's amazing to me how analysts, when workers ask for their fair share, it's always the end of the world. And, no one, the last 4 years in general, okay, in the last decade, these companies made $250 billion in profit. In the last 6 months alone, they made $21 billion in profit. In the last 4 years, the price of cars went up 30%. CEO pay went up 40%. No one said a word. No one had any complaints about that. But now, God forbid that workers actually ask for their fair share of equity in the fruits of the labor and the product they produce. And all of a sudden, it's the end of the world. So, if the talking heads, the pundits, the companies want to say that, if we strike, it can wreck the economy. It's not that we're going to wreck the economy. We're going to wreck their economy, the economy that only works for the billionaire class. It doesn't work for the working class.
Hear that, analysts? All right, UAW President Shawn Fain, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it, sir. We did invite the big three automakers to come on. They declined. The invitation is open.
I wonder why they declined. Jake Tapper here doesn't have much to say to Shawn Fain's response. I think he may even agree with him, support him, despite Jake Tapper not always being, pro-working class himself. But when you have someone on like this making the kind of points that Shawn Fain is making, and you'll notice this with, any appearance in mainstream, which doesn't happen very often with these sorts of, union leaders that are on major networks. But when any interview like this happens and they make the points like they're making about, wealth inequality, there's rarely ever any kind of pushback, because there is no legitimate, rational way to push back on the points they are making. The amount of money that people at the top of these companies have been making in relation to how much their employees have been making is just completely out of whack. So there is no response except to agree with Shawn Fain, because he is correct. Now, I want to show you, before I get to the next clip, which is going to be that Ford CEO. And I mean, it's what you expect, but we'll get to that in a bit. Just to show you what the UAW is asking for. So stuff is not crazy, and they've already lowered some of what they're asking for since this, and I'll get to that in a bit as well. But this is on their website, UAW. So eliminating tiers, it's wrong to make any workers second class. The Teamsters ended tiers at UPS. We're ending them at the big three. So essentially meaning that, any new employees at these big automakers, they wouldn't reap the same benefits as the current or veteran employees do. I think it makes perfect sense to eliminate those tiers and allow everyone to benefit, of course. So you have union leadership here actually standing up for all of their workers, not just the ones that are with them right now. Big wage increases. So we're demanding a double-digit pay raises. Big three CEOs saw their pay spike 40% on average over the last 4 years. We know our members are worth the same and more. This is maybe my favorite ask, because you rarely ever see unions ask for the same increase that the CEOs have seen. So they were also asking for a 40% pay increase. They have now lowered that to, I guess you could say, their credit in a sense, because they're showing they're willing to negotiate. But, I think they understand they're not going to get 40%, but keep fighting for it, because you definitely deserve it. But they've lowered it to 36% over 4 years, according to Bloomberg. It is now asking for a series of increases over nearly 5 years. That would start with an 18% boost and then alternate between 5 and 4% annually over the subsequent years of the contract. And as they right here, Common Dreams does, auto workers' average hourly wages in the U.S. have fallen by 30% over the past 2 decades. And the UAW has pointed to major sacrifices auto workers made during the industry's crisis in the late 2000s as a reason for its ambitious contract demands. The union back then agreed to give up retiree health care for new hires and cost of living adjustments for all members as automakers pushed for a federal bailout in 2008. So while these companies were bailed out, and again, these executives clearly have have had no problems since, have increased their pay dramatically. The unions understand that they made a mistake back then and are now asking for what they deserve. So that goes to some of the other points here that are being made. Restoring the cost of living adjustments, defined benefit pension for all workers, reestablish retiree medical benefits, right to strike over plant closures, which it's amazing they can't do this already. So the big three have closed 65 plants over the last 20 years. I feel like this is going to be a major sticking point for the big automaker CEOs. They do not want the ability for their workers to strike if they want to close a plant and move it, out of the country. Working family protection program, and end abuse of temporary workers, more paid time off to be the families, and significantly increase retiree pay. So all good stuff. Let me get to this clip from what's his name? Former Ford CEO Mark Fields. So here are his comments on these contract negotiations.
What are we, 15 years on from the financial crisis, but the lesson of the failure of General Motors during that period and just the challenge and struggle that so many of the other Detroit automakers went through as it relates to the way the union thinks about these things today?
Well, if you look at their demands, it's literally they want to claw back literally all the benefits they had prior to the bankruptcy of GM and Chrysler. It's almost going back to the 20th century benefits they had. But we live in a very different world now. The Detroit Three have about 40% of market share in the U.S., where they used to have about 60. And there's many more competitors now, Andrew, particularly on the EV side. And so, it's going to be it's quite a different world now.
Ah, yes, it's quite a different world now. So all of the workers that create this value for the CEOs, these workers, they have to compromise, while the CEOs get to enjoy their 40% pay bump over 4 years. Like, just, I mean, this is CNBC. This is the business network, so you expect this kind of talking point, but like, if this guy was on, I don't know, almost maybe any other, maybe if he was on Jake Tapper's show, he would get some pushback there on that point, just because of the amount of money that executives have made while the workers have had to sacrifice. And I just want to go back, because I forgot to mention this in the previous, after the previous clip, but how Jake Tapper said, he wanted Shawn Fain to respond to the idea that a strike will dramatically hurt the economy. I don't care for the framing of that question, but I understand that is the framing that is generally used. It's not that the strike necessarily may hurt the economy. It's that the greed of the CEOs is hurting the economy. Their unwillingness to give workers a fair contract, that is what hurts the economy. So we have to get out of this mindset that, a strike hurts the economy in some way. It isn't the strike. Why are they striking? You have to go back to the source. Why are they striking? They're striking because they want a fair deal. So it's the people not giving them a fair deal. It's their fault. It isn't the strike's fault. It is the fault of these CEOs, these executives. It is their fault. They're the ones potentially hurting the economy. So it's important to, deprogram ourselves from decades and decades of anti-union propaganda, the way news has traditionally framed all of these issues. It's even hard. I fall into it constantly because, again, we grew up in a world where strikes were never looked at as a positive thing. So you have to be able to get out of that mindset and really understand here who deserves the blame. And it is not the fault of striking workers. Now, I want to reference this as well in regards to this clown. So Bernie Sanders put out this is today actually, this new piece in The Guardian. So the UAW may soon strike. Every American should support them. Workers at the big three car makers earn less now in real dollars than they did 15 years ago as their CEOs make more and more. Their fight is everyone's fight. So I just want to reference some data that he points out here. In the first half of 2023, the big three automakers made a combined $21 billion in profits, up 80% from the same period last year. Over the past decade, these same companies made some $250 billion in profits in North America alone. Yet last year, the big three spent $9 billion not to improve the lives of their workers, not to make their factories safer, but on stock buybacks and dividends to make their wealthy executives and stockholders even richer. So all of these profits that they have, they're not spending them on workers. They're spending it to artificially inflate their own stock to make themselves wealthier. This is why, as Bernie writes, every American should support these striking workers. Last point on this, and I show this in basically every video about unions because I want to make sure any random person watching this video understands this. This is from the Economic Policy Institute. As union membership declines, income inequality increases. So the existence of unions, when unions are strongest, more of that income is going not just to people in unions, but to all workers, because unions raise the standard for what is acceptable in the workplace, acceptable in terms of benefits and acceptable in terms of pay. The existence of unions raise that. So that's why you see this connection here. Meanwhile, less unions result in more of that income going to executives. So it is very important to support the UAW here, as Bernie points out. But great appearance from Shawn Fain on CNN. I hope to see him on more cable news shows because I think he does a really good job breaking these issues down and showing what the real problem is.